Hello, my friends. I wanted to take a quick moment just to recognize the fact that I crossed 50,000 followers here on this here clock app, and just say thank you. I really appreciate it. Now that I have as much reach as I have, I promise that I will have something in my hands worth taking when I reach you. So thank you. Oh goodness, I'm being attacked by the wind. So thank you for allowing me to be your book recommendation person, and thanks for being here. We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold. So begins Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the legendary novella by Hunter S. Thompson. Now, I say novella even though Thompson himself claimed that this all happened. He had a history for exaggeration, which is what birthed the entire genre of gonzo journalism, for which he is the patron saint. The text, if you will, tells the story of Thompson and his lawyer going to Las Vegas and finding the American dream. By turns frightening, violent, hilarious, and profound, this was a formative text for me in my young years. I mean, just listen to this. And that, I think, was the handle. That sense of inevitable victory over the forces of old and evil. Not in any mean or military sense, we didn't need that. Our energy would simply prevail. There was no point in fighting, on our side or theirs. We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. Like, come on. Hello, my friends. I need your help. Now, as some of you might know, my undergraduate degree is in theater, and I have a long history of being in love with plays. Reading plays was like my thing in college. So much so that when the Dramatist Play Service started a sort of like mystery box of plays, I immediately signed up. But the problem is, I didn't really read any of them, and now the pile looks like this. Yep, haven't read any of those, and that's where you come in. I'm gonna have you all decide which of these plays gets added to my TBR. So you might need to pause this video a little bit, but I'm gonna flip through all of these, and whichever one sounds good to you, call it out in the comments, and whichever plays get the most call outs, those are the ones that I'm adding to my TBR. Let's go! Imagine being such a good writer that you can get away with releasing one novel every 10 years. This is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. The Secret History tells the story of a group of classic students in a Vermont college that form their own secret society of sorts. And as with most secret societies, they eventually do something unspeakable. Donna Tartt, who is most recently known for winning the Pulitzer Prize with her novel The Goldfinch, does an amazing job of making you believe in these characters. Every action they take, every action they don't take, and everything that they say, you understand why they're saying it. And when you put this mastery of prose in a very cozy environment like a college, you end up with a wonderful, wonderful slice of dark academia. I believe this is the best place to start with Tartt's work before moving on to The Little Friend and The Goldfinch, and hopefully she releases another novel eventually. She's about due. So yes and no. While there isn't necessarily one genre that is more susceptible to being weird than the others, there actually is a literary movement that birthed a lot of the weird books that I talk about and sort of were the progenitors of other books. Now, that literary movement is referred to as the modernist movement prior to the postmodernist movement, which we'll get to in a second. But the modernists had people like William Faulkner, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, like people like that who were trying to push the boundaries of what the art form could do. From them, we saw a lot of things like experimentation with text, point of view, format, yada, yada, yada. And then from there, they birthed the postmodernists, which is when you start getting into the really weird stuff. So I would say sometimes if I had to put a genre on it, literary fiction tends to be more amenable to weird, but it's kind of all over the place. This one might be a little controversial, but I believe this is a classic worth your time. This is Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. Heart of Darkness in its brief page count raises a number of philosophical questions, both about the world and about the work itself. Are we meant to read the story as a criticism of European colonialism and the way that it affected the rest of the world? Or by casting Kurtz as the so-called villain of the story, is he actually holding up that colonialism? Because while Kurtz unquestionably commits atrocities, they pale in comparison to the business as usual of the ivory trading company that he rebelled against. It's also fitting that these same themes and questions would then go on to inhabit the spiritual successor of the work, the film Apocalypse Now. Many people have read the story in many different ways. I personally remember this being the first time I ever got in an argument with a teacher over the meaning of a book. She said it was strictly about colonialism, and I said it was about the nature of evil. So this is absolutely true, and while this video is still like fresh in the algorithm, I did want to address this a little bit and talk about why I featured this book in particular. So yes, I agree 100% that reading about colonialism from the point of view of the colonist is really played out at this point. The reason I did decide to go for Heart of Darkness and why I did mention upfront that it would be a controversial take is because to me, the colonialism is the secondary portion of it rather than the character study of what it means to be evil. But if it were just the colonialism, I wouldn't bother. Like Rudyard Kipling, he's a great writer, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. You'll probably never see one of his books on here because it's just pure British colonialism. And to echo what many people have been saying in the comments, if you do want to read about African colonialism, the colonization of Africa from the point of view of an African, things fall apart, but Chinua Achebe is God tier. Go look it up, it's amazing. So anytime someone brings up Dracula, I feel like it is my moral duty to mention Powers of Darkness. If you don't know what that is, oh boy, have I got a story for you. So Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, right? And then when it was translated into Nordic languages like Icelandic and Swedish, nobody really batted an eye, right? They're like, yes, this is Dracula. Just a translation, nothing weird here. Except for some reason, the translator just started changing shit. The story, while still featuring many of the same characters, is very different. Now, there's some speculation that the translator got a hold of like an earlier draft of the novel because like Powers of Darkness has a lot of elements from like the early versions of Dracula that weren't published, but it's still kind of weird. It's also weird that we didn't realize that there was a fundamental difference between the two versions until very recently. So if you want to scratch that Dracula itch, look into Powers of Darkness. It's bizarre that this exists. Want a weird book that features the devil, a talking cat, and is Russian? This is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This novel is a wild ride. By times very, very funny, and other times kind of profound in like a weird way. This book really keeps you guessing what's gonna happen from moment to moment. One half of the novel is a wonderful satire of Stalinism and Stalin-era Soviet Union, and the other is a retelling of The Passion of the Christ, not the movie, the actual biblical story, juxtaposed with what's going on in the first half. The way the narratives interweave and comment on each other is pretty fascinating, and the characters are just wonderful. In particular, Behemoth, a gigantic black cat that can wield a firearm, let's say, who talks, because, you know, why not? Definitely a great read for anyone who enjoys Russian fiction, biblical fiction, or really just a weird read. So someone asked me on one of my previous videos if I could recommend plays to read to get into reading plays, and that's my jam. So I thought of a few that are good if you're just getting into reading theater. First and foremost, one of my favorite plays of all time, the play that got me in love with reading plays and reading in general, Angels in America by Tony Kushner. A wonderful, weird, political, gay romance set at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. Next, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the greatest American playwrights of all time, August Wilson. His Century Cycle is unparalleled. He was one of the best to ever do it. I would recommend either Fences, The Piano Lesson, or Gem of the Ocean. If you want something really weird, Wojciech by Georg Buchner is like right there for you. Waiting for Godot is one of the most important plays of the 20th century and it's also one of the best. And lastly, if you're in the mood for something funny and witty, I cannot recommend The Importance of Being Earnest high enough. It is spectacular. I realize this might be too soon, but I believe this classic is worth your time. This is The Plague by Albert Camus. While The Stranger gets most of the attention when it comes to Camus' writing, I believe The Plague deserves to be held in just as high regard, if not higher, honestly. Because while it is not one of the foundational texts of existentialism, it is still a wonderful examination of both human nature and the philosophy around human nature, especially in the face of horror, tragedy, and trauma. As the title suggests, this takes place during a plague in a small walled-off city in Algiers, and the novel does a great job exploring and postulating the world that we've all currently found ourselves in the age of the coronavirus. I will mention though that this novel is not for the weak of stomach because there are some pretty churning moments. And the first description of that diseased rat coming into the city, I still get chills. It's terrifying. A foundational text of We're going back to back with Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is Love in the Time of Cholera. Love in the Time of Cholera is a tricky beast, which is why it's landing on weird books instead of classics worth your time. On the surface, the novel just seems to be a beautiful and straightforwardly written love story. But as the novel goes on, you begin to suspect that you cannot really trust our narrator, Florentino. When Fermina Daza's husband passes away after decades of marriage, Florentino purposefully attends the funeral to once again, 51 years after he did it the first time, proclaim his love to her. Sounds pretty romantic, right? In the following novels, however, Florentino lays out his 622 affairs with women that he had in the intervening time. Which begs the question, did he really love her? Or is it just about control? It's up to you. So this right here is a fantastic question. Shakespeare has so many plays and the language can be difficult, especially if you're not used to it. So hey, how do you get into it? A few people already replied to this comment and said, hey, it's meant to be seen, go see a play, right? And honestly, I would agree that's probably the best way to do it, but not everyone has access to perform Shakespeare, let alone quality perform Shakespeare. But I have the perfect cheat code solution for you. If you are a member of Audible, there is a version of the complete works of Shakespeare performed by the Christopher Marlowe Dramatic Society that, if you use the monthly subscription, is only 1 credit. That's 98 hours of Shakespeare performed by some of the best actors to ever walk the boards for 1 credit. Not only is it one of the best ways to get into Shakespeare, it's also one of the best values on Audible, period. Go check it out.